My name's Will Stroh. You may have seen me in your Slack channels from time to time, some of you more than others. I'm a principal support engineer here at Qumulo, and today we're focusing on one of the things that in the support realm we get asked an awful lot, which is my cluster healthy? And it's somewhat of a nebulous question, if you will, because there's a lot of different ways things can go wrong. But the dirty little secret about Qumulo is unless there's a banner there, odds are your cluster's probably healthy. That being said, we can go into some of the more obscure, or possibly not obscure, but more manual ways of taking a look at your cluster and seeing what's going on. So that being said, here's kind of a rundown of things that we like to check when customers do ask us if their cluster is quote unquote healthy or not. This is somewhat in the order of importance, if you will. So without further ado, we'll just go ahead and dive right in here. And if you have any questions, forgot to mention my favorite person, Delpho, is in the chat channel. So feel free to harass him and or ask questions out there. And we'll get those as we go along. All right, first up, Quorum Health. So Quorum itself is kind of the heart and soul of any clustered file system. When we have a situation where we don't have quorum, or we have a quorum loss, if you will, that will be a case where we have a node that's either offline, it's possibly on fire in the data center. We've seen that once or twice, honestly. It could be recused for very number of reasons. That's where we'll manually pull it out of quorum so it doesn't cause any issues, or just general unavailability. Maybe someone unplugged some cables on it. Stranger things have happened. Now, you will see a banner for this one. We'll go as we go through these, we call out what we do see banners for and what we don't. And so as you can see here in the GUI, we're unable to communicate with node muffin-2. Great. Now we say data is at risk. All nodes must be online before systems can reprotect. Awesome. What does that really mean to me at the end of the day? Every cluster out there has what's called erasure encoding on it. And as part of that, we allow a certain number of drives to be offline and a certain number of nodes to be offline. Your base default one is going to be 6.4 encoding. And what that means is you can have 2 drives out or 1 node out. Now, a node obviously has more than 2 drives in it, so we have some ways we work around that. But by and large, if you keep that in mind, it kind of lets you know where things are at. Now, we do have some documentation out there. If you look for, I think it's protection in the docs.qumulo.com portal, it will bring up how many nodes you can have offline for erasure for your specific encoding mechanism. But you can also just do a protection status get out there, and that will tell you. And I think we pop that one up here in a few. But by and large, here's my, in this case, I have something wrong with node 2. Is it planned? Could be. Is it important? Probably. Now, we can also see this over if we run the internal command. This is the one and only time I'm going to let you guys have the QQ internal command. So feel free to write it down and run this on your own. But we can also see this from the CLI. Now, if we VPN into your system, remote connectivity out there, this is what your support engineer will be running to see what's going on. So if we just take a brief rundown of this here, on the left-hand side, this is all one big output. But on the left-hand side, we're logged into node 1, running this command, and we see all nodes. That all nodes is how many nodes we should be expecting to see. That's how many nodes the cluster knows he should have out there at any given time. The in nodes is what we currently see. So in this case, we see nodes 1, 3, and 4. Now, we know this because we also see on the GUI that node 2 is kicked out of quorum for whatever reason. Is degraded is true, is full is false, because we are both degraded and not full. On the other side, really the important things here are this out nodes bit. So again, we know we have node 2 out. And down here where we have last abandoned time. This will actually give you time when we last had a quorum abandoned out there. Ideally, this matches up with what you see in Trends or Nexus or an email alert going forward. And this can be used, when you are trying to determine what's going on with your system, when things may have gone out. Now, if this happened to coincide with, say, let's see, high latency reported from users, well, okay, we can track that back and say, yeah, at this point in time, we had a quorum event. Node 2 was out of quorum. Anyone who would have been connected to node 2, those rolling floating IP addresses would have rolled over to a new node. So perhaps they were trying to connect during that time. Perhaps they were running a big, massive process, and now we're suddenly down one resource in the name of a node. Things can happen out there, but these are all important things to kind of look for when you're trying to debug things on your own. Now, we mentioned protection status. You will see this in the GUI. And if you go to the cluster tab up there, it'll pop up there. And in this case, we're protected from 2 drive failures or 1 node failure. Again, this is not 2 drive failures and a node failure. It's not 1 drive failure and 1 node failure. There's a magic word of "or" out there. Now, as your cluster does get larger and larger, these numbers can increase. So you can certainly get like 4 drive failure or 2 node failure. And you may be in a situation where you can get a couple of each going out there. Now, that said, if I have a drive failure, we'll kind of skip ahead here. If I do have a drive failure, you only care about it so long as the drive has not been reprotected against. So if you pull up our protection status get on your cluster, you'll see at the bottom 2 lines there are your remaining node failures and remaining drive failures. So if you were to lose a drive at this point in time, your remaining drive failures would be 1. If you ran a restriper status, you'd see it doing a protecting and then a rebalancing. And once the reprotect finishes up, your remaining drive failures will go back to 2. And then you can go off and lose another 2 if you wanted to. Or set somebody, if you have a loose capybara in your data center and you can't get a hold of Ross Thompson, you can certainly just get those things replaced in there and you'll be back up and running. So this is also another important thing to take a look at when you are concerned about the quorum side of things. Because by and large, we need to know where the system is at currently and what we can be at going forward. Now, if you look above that, line 3 and 4, well, line 3, I guess, we're showing max drive failure. So this is how many I actually have on my system. So in this case, I have a 6-4 encoding scheme. I can handle 2 drive failures at any given time. Now, that is cluster-wide. It's not per node. It is cluster-wide. But as you get into higher encoding schemes, like I said, 8.5, for example, that would be a 3 drive failure out there. A 2016 would be a 4 drive failure. If you're interested in going to these, we do have, if you do have a large enough cluster, we do have transcode options now. We can roll over to a larger encoding scheme. Additionally, if you don't have a large cluster, reach out to your sales guy and they'll be happy to get you one. It will cost a little bit of money though. All right, next up, kind of focused on a lot of this already. Let's talk about drive health. So when you pop a drive back in the system, let's back up. When you have a drive failed in your system here, you'll get this big red banner across the top of the screen. And again, if you have a big red banner, something's probably wrong. It's kind of like the Ghostbusters. If the light is green, the trap is clean. Well, in this case, if you got a big red banner, you might want to think about it. You got ghosts in your system here. So when you pop a new drive in there, this banner should go away. If it doesn't, for whatever reason, obviously, you're not healthy. If it does go away, you are more than welcome to reach out to your friendly support rep and ask them if the system looks fine. But honestly, it looks fine at that point. Now, there is a question of IPMItool versus Qumulo here. With Qumulo, we will fail a drive after 3 events in the span of a 2-week period. That is a pretty low threshold, all things considered, for the industry. So case in point, if you do have HPE systems, your ILO may show the drive looking perfectly fine and normal, whereas we will have failed it. Now, that failure can come in the form of, typically you'll see a read error on there or write error, where we'll reassign the block and move on with life. But if we see more than three of those, then at that point we assume the drive is going bad and we'll fail it out. Again, the ILO has a higher threshold than that, so that will explain why you see things like that. Again, we got a big banner on the GUI here. If we go into the system itself, what you can look for is the cluster slots command. That's going to query all the slots, all the disk slots on the cluster, and see what we have out there. Now, in this case, we're getting a little fancy with the egrep. Not terribly fancy, but a little fancy. And we're looking for dead and empty bays out there. If you have something that shows dead, means we do see a drive in that spot, but for whatever reason, it's not talking to us. If we see empty in that slot, then we're not registering a drive there at all. Could be a reseat issue, could be dust bunnies in there, could be all sorts of things. Typically, if we do see something that shows up as empty, first order of business is, can we reseat it and see if it comes back to life? Again, inside baseball here, if we do see something that is showing up empty on the and you got a replacement drive from us, sure. First time, maybe a dead DOA drive. Second time, probably not a dead DOA drive. That or you have really poor luck. In those cases, we may look at doing something with swapping with another drive on the system, see if we can bring that bay back to life. On a rare occasion, it can be a bay issue. We have seen it. Unfortunately, that means you're swapping out a chassis at that point. So it's not something we really like to do. Just gets a lot of effort, but it can happen out there. All right. As we go down our list, we've dealt with Quorum, we've dealt with drives. Now let's take a look at network health. For this one, we don't see any banners. And a lot of the rationale there is we don't know what your network topology is. If you look at this example on the screen here, we have 3 nodes that are sitting at 20 gig and one that's at 10. Was this a case of we simply ran out of network cables? Possibly. Do we not have a switch port? Possibly. We really don't know at this point. So we're not going to banner on the screen for that. We will, if you go into the cluster overview in the network topology down there, you will see this. And in this case, you can say, maybe I should do something about this. Now, it's a little easier to pull up if you are handy with the SSH side of things. You can take a look for things real quick using the IPMItool command. Now, this is built in. This is all on the shady underbelly of Linux at this point. But what you can do is you can go ahead and query your interfaces out there. So in this case, we have ETH2 and ETH3. Yours may be 4 and 5. It may be 0 and 1. It is going to be dependent upon the platform itself. But what we're looking for here in this IPMItool output is, do we see a speed and do we see link detected? So in this case, in that top one, we see 10 gig link detected, yes. The bottom one, ETH3, we don't see anything out there. So link detected being no is kind of a pointer at that point. Do we have a case of bad NIC, bad SFP if you have one, bad cable, bad switch port? Those are your options at that point. Now, show of hands, what's the easiest thing to replace there? You're ideally all saying, yay, it's the cable. 9 times out of 10, cable is the easiest thing to replace. That's usually what we go after first when we see these situations. If it's not something straightforward as a cable, it does become a case of plug and chug and try and figure out what's going on here, is why this isn't working. The nice thing about the cluster, if you are in the default LACP mode, you do have 2 interfaces per node. And assuming both those interfaces are enabled, let's take this ETH2 and ETH3 here. One thing you could certainly do if your switch isn't tied down to MAC addresses is you can take ETH3 off of, what do we got here? QFSD node 1. You can take ETH3 from there, plug it into, swap the ends with ETH3 from QFSD 2. Do we see a link detected at that point? And it helps you narrow down where the problem is at. It's really a plug and chug manual operation. No, not going to lie about that one, but it is the easiest and most direct path out there. Certainly easier than reaching out to the network team. Sorry, apologies to anyone from the network team here. Okay, other things we can do with this IPMItool command. We also have the ability to look at interfaces and look for actual drops out there, errors, discard, etc. It's a word salad up there, and I apologize. But what we're doing here, for those of you not CLI friendly is we're looking for all of these messages: error, drop, CRC, pause, failed, discard. Anything that's not equal to 0, go ahead and print to the screen. So in this case, we have a bunch of these frame errors out here. Is this a problem? Possibly is the answer. We don't know if these errors are from when the system was initially set up. We don't know, was this someone let their 7-year-old play Cable Monster back there and things went awry? Not that I've been guilty of that before. But we have no real indication as to what the delta rate of change on these is. So you'll notice we also tack on the date command there. What we can do at this point is we rerun this 5-10 minutes later. Do we see a noticeable increase? Now, why do I care about this? Outside of just general network health, we can go full circle here. And when we see things like frame errors and carrier errors, we may be resetting the NIC. Anytime we reset a NIC, if we go from an offline to online, so for example, if we were to pull this guy back up here and we had link detected yes, and then link detected no, then link detected yes. Every time that takes place, we're changing what we have as available resources out there. Anytime that changes, we're going to do a quorum event. Great. Why do I care? As a storage person, you probably don't. Quorum events are normal. They should be happening. That's fine. As an end user, if the cluster is going into quorum events, that's going to be a brief pause in the I/O. We all know that. We all accept that. Everything's fine with that. The problem is if you're in a constant state of quorum events, as an end user, this is going to be seen as an outage. And therein lies the problem. So in cases like this, if we are seeing large number of frame errors, large number of carrier errors, large number of CRCs, discards, we probably have a bad component in there on the NIC side. Now, we can handle that one of two ways. The easy way is to walk in there and unplug it. That takes care of it real quick. Conversely, we could offline it from the software side. So if your data center is 2 hours away from you, we have VPN enabled, we can remotely go in, pop that, flip that NIC to an offline status, and 9 times out of 10, that'll clear up the issue. Then it simply becomes a case of going back and troubleshooting what the actual cause is in that case. The downside of that, just for total transparency, the downside of that is if the system were to reboot, we reset that NIC status. So if you had offlined it and then had a power outage, when it comes back online, that NIC is going to come back online as well, at which point you're going to be back in the same situation. It's very rare that that happens where you have the NIC or the power drop out, the NIC reset. But now that we've said it once here, there's going to be 5, 6, 7 instances popping up in Slack over the next week, guaranteed. All right, next up is replication. Replication is an interesting one because while we highlight it in the banner, big red thing up here, it may not be right. So if you go into your replication, you'll see this scary error message. Cannot communicate with target cluster. OMG, what should we do? You can click on dismiss that error there. I love clicking on that thing. And then the next minute, it pops up again. You're like, what the heck is going on here? So if you click on the little 3 dots there, or if you go into the CLI, you can get a little better idea of what's taking place. And in this case, we're seeing cannot communicate with target cluster, check it, see what's going on, replication not running. Now, the important thing here is this all comes out of a JSON file. And if you look at the front line there, it's error from last job. You'll note that's not error from current job, it's error from last job. So in cases like this, that may actually be transferring just fat, dumb, and happy. But until it completes that job, the current job it's working on, it's not going to get rid of that error message. So if you do click on those 3 little, I think people call it the hamburger over there, it's 2 buns and a patty. Haven't gotten their double from In-N-Out yet. If they click on the little hamburger over there, you will see output on the screen. It'll show you the current job if it's running. And if you see megabytes changing, if you see gigabytes changing, if you see file scan changing, anything changing basically is usually a good sign. So again, replication can very well be a red herring in the sense that because it's reporting on the last state, it may give you a little qualms about where we're at. Typically, we'll see this when people are doing code upgrades, and if they opt for a full reboot as opposed to a rolling reboot, then as all the nodes go down, replication from the source side stops at that point because you can't reach anything. And then once they come back up, we'll have the jobs kick back off, but suddenly you'll have this error message up here, and it'll say 10 relationships have stopped replicating. What's going on? And everyone panics. Well, it's not really anything to panic about. We're letting it do its thing and it's getting back in business. If you do see this error hang out there longer than what you would expect to be a quote unquote normal amount of time, it probably bears investigation at that point. Now, in the case here where we see can't communicate with target cluster, did something happen? Can I ping the cluster? Do I have access to it from where I'm at? You know, typically if the backhoe cuts the line over to the destination side, replication is typically the least of your concerns, because usually your help desk inbox is going to be filled with a whole bunch of angry end users who suddenly lost access. So, you know, it is something to keep in mind as far as if the only thing seeing the error is the cluster, then it's probably something related to the cluster. But if I have the cluster error plus a whole bunch of end users, it's probably not the cluster per se at that point. Not as a guarantee, but possibly. All right. Next up is a very common occurrence where we will have customers reach out to us and say, I have a red light on here. And we're like, cool. What happened? And typically they won't know. They won't know when it started. Most people don't go into their data center on a daily basis and check for lights. I know a few customers who do. They have little cameras in front of every cluster, which is really cool. But if you do see LEDs show up there, it's oftentimes it's environmental. There could be something failing, but oftentimes it is environmental, or it's a single component as opposed to the whole system itself. Now, as Qumulo being a software company, we don't have a whole lot of insight into what exactly may or may not be triggering these LEDs, but we do work with our hardware providers to try and narrow that down as much as possible. So the gold standard, if you will, as far as the Qumulo is concerned, is the IPMItool command set. So in this case, we're doing IPMItool SEL, looking at the event list, and we're just looking at the last 10 events. So this one here hasn't had any issues since middle of December of last year. But if we look at what was taking place out there, we see a lot of excitement was going on. Now, there's two different types of events out here. You should see assertions and deassertions. So if you look at line 425, for example, unknown smart CLST stat state deasserted, asserted. I don't know what a smart CLT stat is, but it doesn't look good. Now, likewise, if I look at the events surrounding that, I have a power supply 1 predictive failure, power supply 2 predictive failure. I got a couple more entries of this CLST smart thing. Something's obviously not happy here. Now, one of the items we did gloss over, which you'll notice, was PSUs. Now, we will cover those here in a few seconds, but from the PSUs themselves, and I don't care if you're Qumulo or any one of the competitors out there, PSUs themselves, 9 times out of 10, are low priority on the polling scale. So when you see things like this, we're doing a poll out there and we say, hey, how's my PSU? It reports back yay or nay, thumbs up, thumbs down. And those things are pretty low. We've seen plenty of cases where the polling gets off or it's otherwise delayed, if you will, and it'll say both PSUs are down. Now you ask yourself, how can that be if my system's up? And that's a real darn good question. To the best of my knowledge, we have not yet been gifted wireless power from the aliens for my cluster. So until that happens, we're still in a state where things got to be plugged in. So if you do see something like this on your screen here, like I said, we have two predictive failures. We got this smart CLST thing. Who knows what that's all about? At this point, I would be questioning the state of the cluster. I really would. Now, this should have also set off some big red lights on the front end of it, which typically, up until today, you all had the opportunity to reach out in your Slack channel and say, hey, I got this red light on my cluster. What's it mean? After today, you no longer have that opportunity. So I want you to come to your Slack channel prepared with the IPMItool output. And then we can look over it there and say, yeah, that's messed up. Shouldn't be doing that. Now, a couple different things here. Again, this all happened back on December 14th. We haven't seen it since. Let's say it's today, which is March 28th. One of two things can take place here. If we still have a red light on and this has all happened and you just noticed it now, typically what you can do is say, okay, let's chalk that first one up as an anomaly. Maybe something was going on in the data center. It was getting prepped for Santa Claus to come down the data center chimney. We don't know what was going on that day. Maybe they were doing AC work or something. Let's just clear the light and see if this happens again. So at that point, you can copy all this, we'll have this copied off in the Slack channel, and we can go ahead and clear the LEDs out there. That's this middle command, the sudo IPMItool MC reset cold. That goes out there, resets the master controller, basically the BMC, if you will. Clears all errors out there and moves on with life. Then we can go ahead and clear the error log itself so we don't get double counting for anything. And then we see if it happens again. The unfortunate thing is with LEDs, they are very binary in the sense that they're either on or off. And typically once they go on, they don't go off again, unless it's something like a drive activity or whatnot. But a lot of these will often get triggered, and then you'll just be in a state where they stay triggered. And unfortunately, we don't have a clean way of clearing them outside of doing a reset on the BMC as a whole. And likewise, we don't have a whole lot of rhyme or reason as to why it may have gotten turned on. So we do end up going through the extended list here and see if things do match up. Now, typically what we'll end up seeing is we may see something out there like we saw with this one where we're seeing this power thing go crazy on us here. Cool, probably something wrong out there. We may see something such as a correctable CRC error on a DIM. That will go ahead and flag the LED on the front panel for that node. With those, much like drives, you're not necessarily replacing them on the first error. Everything, hardware is hardware. It does have errors from time to time. So in those cases, we will oftentimes look, is it just one error on a DIM? Great, let's clear the BMC, clear the LED, and let's go on with things. Do we see it again? Fine, let's go ahead and address that. You may also end up in a situation where a DIM is just catastrophically failing on you, and it's limping along with correctable CRC errors, but it's always humorous when you pull it up and the customer says, yeah, I have this light on. You're like, oh, cool, let me take a look at this. And you pull it up and it's just pages of CRC errors. And you have no idea how this thing's still limping along at this point. At that point, yes, replace the DIM. Obviously, that's a no-brainer there. Keep in mind, from the Qumulo perspective, or from the Qumulo customer support perspective, all you guys on the phone, all you guys watching this after the fact, You entrusted Qumulo for your business. Your business is making money, regardless of what your CEO says. Your business is making money. We need to get you back to making money out there. So if that involves shipping a DIM, so be it. That's no skin off anyone's back there. All right. Let's delve a little more into IPMItool just because it's fun. So as we mentioned about PSUs and how we have these polling errors from time to time, and you can end up in a state where, like I said, both PSUs report 0 voltage, which makes, again, 0 sense. If you actually query the sensors themselves, which you can do here via this IPMItool sensor list command, you can get a feel for what's out there. Now, I throw the temp CPU one in there because, as you'll see on the Nexus slide, we actually report on that. But it is something to keep in mind. You know, if you are running in a situation where perhaps your air conditioning unit went out, you're frying CPUs left and right, you know, you may see this temp CPU. I don't know what 70 degrees Celsius is, but it sounds hot. That thing pops up a little more. I think my hard drives start dying at 60, I want to say, 63. So if that thing goes up to 80, 90, I don't know what the threshold is off the top of my head, but bad things could happen. Again, as we get on the list there, we got PSU status and PSU input. That's kind of the, you know, those are kind of the important ones. As long as you see something with the input there, you know, if the cluster reports both PSUs are failed or otherwise out of service, and you pull up this here and you're like, nope, nice try, but I got wattage going to them, odds are they're not failed. So again, it's just little things like this you have to keep in mind when you are troubleshooting the system. It is a very complex system out there at the end of the day. And so, you know, a lot of things can go wrong, but are they actually wrong becomes the magic question there. Now, I want to wrap things up here with Nexus before we go into Q&A. Nexus is the single pane of glass that we've been touting a lot out there. If you are on, I think it's 612 or higher, I want to say it is, or above 7.0, if you have a proxy in place, you should have Nexus access. And as this matures and goes forward here, this is really where you're going to want to be going to take a look at how your cluster is doing. You know, right off the top, we do have that hardware health there. We see nodes are online, drives are online, the CPU temperatures are normal, network interfaces are all good. If these things do break, that should not be a green dot. It should be a big red dot, at which point you click on it, it tells you what's going wrong there. If you don't have access to this for whatever reason, if you go to nexus.qumulo.com and all you see is a downloads tab, please, by all means, reach out in your Slack channel. It could be a case where you're running an older release like 3.3.3. You know who you are and who I'm talking about. But more often than not, it is just a simple single sign-on error out there. We can get that fixed and wrapped up. Like I said, I believe this is with 612 and above, as well as 7.0 and above if you do have a proxy out there. All righty. Questions and answers. I saw a couple come through, and before I could read them, Adolfo answered them, I believe. So I think, for the most part, we're all happy. All right. Well, if you think of something after the fact, by all means, please reach out in the Slack channel. You know where to find us. If you don't have a Slack channel, please send us an email, call in on the phone, send us a pizza while you're at it. That'd be cool. Any of those ways work perfectly good. Again, you know, I adjusted earlier on saying, you know, you're not allowed to reach out to us for these things. Obviously, you still are allowed to. Please do. It's much easier to troubleshoot errors and things such as, you know, cluster health when the problem is happening. So, you know, versus 6 months down the line when you'd suddenly notice the red light on there, or 6 months down the line, you've had customers complaining that they've had slow access, and then we pull it up and you're only running at, you know, half your network speed. You know, these things do take place. They do occur. I get it. But certainly, don't feel obligated, but also don't be scared to go out there and run these commands on your cluster. I think they're finding a way to send the slide deck out. It'll be posted online. Certainly reach out and say, hey, what was that command we ran there? None of these commands are disruptive by any stretch. These are all informational gathering commands that can be run. And the more detail you can come to support with, the better. It saves everyone a lot of time on both ends of the equation. And maybe while you're reaching out to us, you might see the answer yourself and feel better about it, and you get a star sticker. So let's go down that path. Alrighty, folks. Well, I will let you get back to whatever you're doing on this fine Thursday morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it may be. If you see any dogs out there and they're talking, don't forget to feed them tacos. And thank you kindly, and we'll see you next month, next webinar.